What if almost everything you have been taught about abundance began in the wrong place? Most people believe Jesus asked God before every miracle, but the Gospels reveal something far more profound. Before the bread multiplied, before the crowds were fed, before lives were transformed, there was an attitude. There was a state of consciousness, and hidden within the Aramaic language was a word that expressed it perfectly, a word so deep that no modern translation can fully contain it. For centuries, its richest meaning has remained almost invisible beneath layers of translation. Tonight, we are going back to the language Jesus actually spoke. You'll discover why this single Aramaic word stands at the doorway of divine abundance. And before this video ends, you may never pray for provision the same way again. Throughout history, countless people have searched for the secret behind the extraordinary life of Jesus. Some focused on his miracles, others studied his parables. Many admired his compassion, yet very few have paused to consider something remarkably simple. Every teaching, every prayer, every blessing, and every conversation he shared with ordinary people took place in Aramaic, the living language of Galilee. That language shaped not only the words he spoke, but also the way he understood God, humanity, and the nature of abundance itself. When modern readers encounter the miracles recorded in the Gospels, they naturally pay attention to what happened after Jesus spoke. 5 loaves became enough for thousands. Water became wine. Empty fishing nets overflowed. Yet the deeper question is often overlooked. What was happening within Jesus before those miracles unfolded? What inner reality allowed him to move through life with complete confidence that the Father's provision would always be sufficient? The answer begins to emerge in the Aramaic worldview. Unlike many modern languages, Aramaic words rarely express only one idea. A single word can simultaneously describe a relationship, an action, an inner experience, and a spiritual reality. This is especially true of one extraordinary word that appears at the beginning of the prayer, commonly known as the Lord's Prayer. For most readers, it has become familiar through centuries of translation. Yet its original depth remains largely hidden. That word is Abun. Most translations reduce it to a single expression, Our Father. While beautiful, this captures only the surface. The first listeners who heard Jesus pronounce Abun would have recognized something much greater. They heard the living source from which all life continually flows. They heard origin, nurture, breath, belonging, and the constant generosity of the Creator held together in one sacred expression. Before we can understand abundance, we must first rediscover the source from which abundance naturally flows. One of the most remarkable moments in the ministry of Jesus appears in the Gospel of John, chapter 6. A vast crowd has gathered. Thousands of people stand before him, hungry, tired, and with almost no food available. From every human perspective, the situation is defined by limitation. There is not enough bread. There are not enough resources. There is no obvious solution. Yet Jesus never begins with the problem. His attention moves immediately toward the Father. Before the bread is multiplied, before anyone receives a single piece, Jesus gives thanks. That detail is easy to overlook, yet it reveals one of the deepest spiritual patterns found throughout his ministry. Gratitude comes before provision. Communion comes before multiplication. Alignment comes before abundance. This sequence appears again and again, quietly woven into the gospel narratives. It is here that Abun becomes much more than the opening word of a prayer. It becomes a way of seeing reality. To speak Abun is to remember that God is not distant, reluctant, or withholding. He is the ever-present source from whom life, wisdom, strength, and provision continually flow. Jesus did not approach the Father from fear or scarcity. He approached from complete trust, because he knew his relationship with the source had never been broken. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson hidden beneath the miracles. Abundance does not begin when circumstances change. It begins when the heart remembers where its true provision has always originated. Long before bread multiplied in the hands of Jesus, certainty had already multiplied within his spirit. The miracle visible to the crowd was simply the outward expression of an inner reality that had been established first. If you've made it this far, it was not by accident. Few are truly ready to go deeper, and that's perfectly fine. But if something in you is saying yes, the study guides are pinned comment, and the best is yet to come. In the next chapters, you'll discover what could change everything for you. If Abwin reveals the source, another question naturally follows. Why did Jesus begin with the source before every act of provision? Why not begin with the need itself? The answer is quietly woven throughout the Gospels, yet it is often overshadowed by the miracles that followed. Jesus consistently demonstrated that heaven responds differently when the human heart is already aligned with the giver rather than consumed by the gift. This becomes beautifully clear during the feeding of the 5,000, surrounded by thousands of hungry people. Every visible circumstance pointed toward lack. The disciples saw scarcity. They counted the loaves, measured the fish, and concluded there would never be enough. Jesus looked at the very same situation, yet his attention rested somewhere entirely different. Before a single piece of bread was distributed, he lifted his eyes, gave thanks, and acknowledged the Father's abundance. The miracle did not begin in his hands. It began in his awareness. This is where the deeper meaning of Abwin transforms our understanding. The word invites us to remember that the Creator is not merely the one who once gave life, he is the one who continually sustains it. Every sunrise, every breath, every seed becoming a harvest quietly bears witness to an unceasing generosity woven into creation itself. Jesus lived with this awareness. Every moment of his earthly ministry, he never acted as though heaven needed to be persuaded to provide. He lived as though divine provision was already flowing from its eternal source. Many people unknowingly reverse this pattern. They begin with anxiety, then move toward prayer. They begin with fear, then search for faith. They begin with lack, hoping abundance will eventually appear. Jesus demonstrated another path. He began with communion. He began with gratitude. He began with the certainty that the Father's goodness was already present before circumstances reflected it. Imagine how different our daily lives would become if every decision began from that same awareness. Before worrying about tomorrow, remembering Abwin. Before dwelling on financial uncertainty, remembering Abwin. Before measuring what appears insufficient, remembering that the source has never been exhausted. Perhaps this was never simply a word spoken by Jesus. Perhaps it was the atmosphere from which every miracle naturally emerged. The deeper we follow the teachings of Jesus, the more clearly we discover that abundance was never presented as the accumulation of possessions. It was always the overflow of a life completely rooted in the Father. This explains why people left his presence carrying far more than food, healing, or answered prayers. They left with restored hope. They left with renewed purpose. They left knowing that the God revealed through Jesus was infinitely more generous than fear had allowed them to believe. One of the greatest misunderstandings about abundance is the belief that it begins when external conditions improve. Jesus revealed the opposite. True abundance begins when the inner life becomes aligned with the eternal source. External provision follows its own timing, but the heart no longer lives as though it has been abandoned. This is the quiet revolution hidden within Abwin. It shifts our attention from striving to trusting, from scarcity to communion, from anxiety to confident expectation. This understanding also changes the way we approach prayer. Instead of seeing prayer as an attempt to convince God to act, Abwin reminds us that prayer first restores relationship. Every time Jesus withdrew to quiet places, he was not escaping the demands of the world. He was returning to the living awareness of the Father. From that place of communion flowed every act of wisdom, every miracle, and every expression of compassion that the Gospels preserve. Perhaps this explains why gratitude appears so consistently throughout his ministry. Gratitude was never an obligation performed after receiving a blessing. It became the natural language of someone who already knew the character of the one from whom every blessing flows. Long before the visible miracle appeared, the certainty of divine provision already filled his heart. Tonight, Abwin invites us into that same way of living, not merely repeating an ancient word, but allowing it to reshape how we see God, ourselves, and the future. The greatest abundance Jesus revealed was not measured by what a person possessed. It was measured by the depth of their trust in the inexhaustible goodness of the Father. Thank you for getting this far. If the awakening of consciousness is hitting you hard, it's a sign that you're ready to go deeper. The study guides are waiting for you in the pinned comments. There is a beautiful reason why Jesus placed such emphasis on returning to the Father before every act of compassion, healing, and provision. He understood that human beings become what they continually contemplate. A heart occupied by fear begins expecting limitation. A heart occupied by gratitude begins recognizing gifts that were present all along. This is why Abun is far more than the opening word of a prayer. It is an invitation to return to the awareness that we are never separated from the source of life. Tonight, before you go to sleep, I invite you to practice something beautifully simple. It requires no special place, no elaborate ritual, and no extraordinary effort. It requires only your attention. Find a quiet moment before closing your eyes. Allow the noise of the day to settle. Breathe slowly and become aware of the gentle rhythm of your own breath. With each inhale, remember that every breath is itself a gift continually received from God. Now place one hand over your heart and quietly speak. Abuan. Pause. Take another slow breath. Again, gently say, Abu. Do not hurry the word. Allow it to rest within you. As you speak it, do not focus on what you lack. Do not begin listing your worries or your needs. Instead, remember the one from whom every good gift ultimately flows. Imagine yourself standing before Jesus, watching him lift his eyes toward heaven before the bread was multiplied. Notice that his confidence did not come from what he held in his hands. It came from the certainty of his relationship with the Father. Remain in silence for a few moments. Let gratitude quietly replace anxiety. Let trust soften every fear about tomorrow. Let your heart remember that the source of all true abundance has never been distant. Before asking for provision, simply rest in the awareness of Abu. This was never about repeating a mystical formula. It is about returning your attention to the relationship that transforms the way you see every circumstance. Often, the greatest miracle is not that life changes overnight. It is that the heart awakens to the abundance that God has been pouring out all along. As we reach the end of this journey, perhaps the greatest discovery is not the ancient Aramaic word itself, but the extraordinary simplicity of the life Jesus lived. His ministry continually revealed that abundance is not something chased through endless striving. It is received through communion with the Father. Again and again, before the miracles, before the provision, before the impossible became possible, his heart was already resting in complete trust. The ancient word Abun preserves that invitation for every generation. It reminds us that God is not a distant ruler waiting to be persuaded. He is the living source from whom life continually flows. When we remember that truth, our relationship with provision begins to change. Gratitude becomes more natural than anxiety. Trust becomes stronger than fear. Hope quietly replaces the constant expectation of lack. The circumstances around us may not change immediately, but the atmosphere within us begins changing at once. And often, it is from that transformed heart that new opportunities, renewed wisdom, unexpected provision, and lasting peace begin to emerge. Carry this word with you tonight. Before you close your eyes, let Abun become your final remembrance. Not as a magical formula, but as a declaration that your life is rooted in the Father's inexhaustible goodness. When tomorrow begins, allow your first thoughts to return to that same source. Over time, you may discover that the greatest abundance Jesus revealed was never measured by possessions alone. It was the unshakable confidence that the Father always remains faithful. Perhaps that is the forgotten treasure hidden within the Aramaic language. It does not merely teach us new words. It invites us to rediscover a new way of living, a life that begins not with fear, but with trust, not with striving, but with communion, not with scarcity, but with the quiet certainty that every good gift flows from the one whom Jesus lovingly called Abu. We are just scratching the surface of this ancient power. Get ready, because in our next video, I will reveal even deeper Aramaic words that uncover layers of Jesus' teachings most people have never encountered. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on so you don't miss this unfolding revelation. I am glad you are here, and I mean that deeply. The fact that you are seeking this knowledge tells me everything about where you are in your journey. Study guides with deeper teachings are waiting for you in the pinned comment below. With gratitude for walking this path together, Before you leave, if this message touched your heart or brought new understanding into your life, write the word Abun in the comments below. Your testimony may encourage someone else who is seeking hope, provision, and renewed faith. Thank you for sharing this moment of ancient wisdom with us. Until the next revelation, walk in peace, walk in gratitude, and walk in the living presence of Abun.